Next we have Tom Leonard, who's going to address the 2012 delegate caucuses for the National GOP Convention.
Thank you. My name is Tom Leonard. I'm here tonight to speak with you regarding the events that occurred during the 2012 election cycle concerning delegates and alternate delegates to the Republican National Convention who were unlawfully removed and replaced by the Massachusetts GOP. To provide a bit of background, I became involved with the Liberty Cause in late 2011. I became very interested in the ideology of Ron Paul around this time. Specifically, I believe in small government, individual liberty, and the idea that the United States should not be the policeman of the world. Ron Paul encapsulated all of these ideas. I decided to attend an event at the Liberty Clubhouse in Worcester, Massachusetts, and was very surprised to find such a large group of people who are invested in the same small government ideology as myself. From late 2011 to February 2012, we worked relentlessly at phone banking in an attempt to get Ron Paul as many votes as possible in the Massachusetts Republican presidential primary, which took place in February 2012. It was our intent to have Dr. Paul score at least 15% of the vote, so he would be allotted, at a minimum, 3 delegates and 3 alternate delegates from Massachusetts. Unfortunately, our efforts fell short, and no candidate, with the exception of Mitt Romney, achieved more than 15% of the vote. Therefore, all delegates from Massachusetts were bound to Mitt Romney. I continue to stay very involved with the Liberty Clubhouse after the 2012 presidential primary, as our mission was only half complete. Many casual political observers may not be aware that there is a caucus that takes place in Massachusetts shortly after the Republican presidential primary to allot delegates from each congressional district to the Republican National Convention. Although these delegates are bound to vote for Mitt Romney at the convention, they have a second and equally important task. The second task for delegates at the convention is to create a party platform that the Republican Party must follow until its next convention is called to order. The 3 points that we wish to emphasize in the party platform were clear and concise: audit the Fed, end the wars, and protect internet freedom. Unfortunately, due to the unlawful actions of the Massachusetts GOP, our delegates were not able to deliver this message to Tampa. Now I will discuss with you the events that occurred on the day of the Massachusetts GOP caucus and the weeks following that caucus. These events eventually led to the unlawful disqualification of duly elected delegates and the discarding of votes from registered Republicans by the Massachusetts GOP. The Massachusetts GOP caucus occurred on April 28, 2012. The rules of the caucus were quite simple. Any resident who was a registered Republican prior to February 15, 2012 had the option to attend the caucus and elect 3 delegates and 3 alternate delegates to the Republican National Convention. There were 2 slates consisting of 3 delegates and 3 alternates that were passed out to each caucus. One slate consisted of delegates and alternate delegates that were closely aligned with the Mitt Romney campaign. The second slate of delegates, the Ronald Reagan Liberty slate, consisted of delegates who believed in a small government philosophy and were closely aligned to the ideology of Ron Paul. For the purpose of brevity, I will focus on the events that occurred in 2 specific caucuses. First, I will focus on the events that occurred in District 7, which is the district I represented. Second, I will focus on the events that occurred in District 8. The District 7 caucus occurred in Randolph, Massachusetts. All attendees to the caucus followed the rules and regulations set forth by the Massachusetts Republican Party for the selection of delegates to the Tampa, Florida 2012 Republican Convention. Per Rule 4.4 of the Massachusetts Republican Party plan for the selection of delegates to the Tampa, Florida 2012 National Convention, all attendees did, quote, certify their qualifications to participate in the caucus by signing statements including their names, addresses, and Republican affiliation. In District 7, our Liberty delegates handed out the Ronald Reagan Liberty slate, listing our names as prospective delegates and alternate delegates to all attendees of the caucus. Once the caucus was called to order, all prospective delegates and alternate delegates were instructed of Rule 4.5 of the aforementioned Mass GOP party plan for the selection of delegates, which states, each nominee for election as a pledged congressional district delegate or alternate delegate shall express a commitment to a qualifying presidential candidate and agree to be bound to vote for that candidate on the first such roll call unless released by such candidate as required by law. So, by placing our names in nomination, each delegate and alternate delegate was pledging to vote for Mitt Romney on the first roll call at the Republican National Convention. There were 2 slates handed out at the District 7 caucus. One slate for the Ronald Reagan Liberty candidates. The other was for the Mitt Romney delegate candidates. Each delegate and alternate delegate was given the opportunity to speak for no more than 2 minutes as to why they felt they should represent District 7 in Tampa. Shortly after the speeches were concluded, the caucus chairwoman announced that the balloting would begin. However, she mentioned that those individuals who are not on the voter roll as registered Republicans would be forced to cast provisional ballots, which would be opened and counted at a later point in time. I must mention at this point in time, there is no mention of provisional ballots in the party plan for the selection of delegates to the RNC. Rule 4.4 of the previously referenced party plan clearly states that all attendees, quote, certified their qualifications to participate in the caucus by signing statements, including their names, addresses, and Republican affiliation. Therefore, each attendee should have had the right to vote on a ballot that would be counted at the caucus. Unfortunately, a uniform ballot was not provided to all attendees of the District 7 caucus. In short, the voting occurred and all individuals listed on the Ronald Reagan Liberty slate were awarded delegate and alternate delegate slots to the 2012 RNC. At this point, after following the Massachusetts Republican Party plan for the selection of delegates to the Tampa, Florida 2012 National Convention, and after following Robert's Rules of Order, all business for the caucus was deemed finished by the caucus chairwoman, and the caucus was closed. In District 8, a much different course of events unfolded on the afternoon of April 28, 2012, excuse me. Upon entering the District 8 caucus, all attendees, in accordance with Rule 4.4 of the Massachusetts Republican Party plan for the selection of delegates, did indeed certify their qualifications to participate in the caucus by signing statements, names, addresses, and Republican affiliation. The caucus was then called to order, and the following statement was made by one of the Romney slate delegates. His name is Matt Sisk. Please watch the following video.
Done. 4 years ago, this was not done. There was no provisional ballot. So the Republican State Committee tried to make this a more fair process for you all, so that your votes could be counted if, in fact, you were found to be a registered voter, a Republican voter, by February 5th, on or before February 15th. So the process is this, that those provisional ballots will remain closed. They will be brought to the Republican State Committee headquarters. Somebody from the Ron Paul campaign, please put forward a name to the caucus chairman, and you will be present for everything that's going on. It's not a closed process, it's very open here. I will personally, I'm a member of the executive committee of the Republican Party, and I will guarantee your presence and your involvement in this process. If those people are found to be registered voters, Republican voters, by February, on or before February 15th, then the vote will be counted. Thank you.
Please note that Matt Sisk said 4 years ago this was not done. There were no provisional ballots. Unfortunately, Mr. Sisk was not aware that the Massachusetts Republican Party plan for the selection of delegates for 2012 made no mention of provisional ballots. The only rule in the party plan that states for eligibility for participation in the caucus is Rule 4.4, which I've stated a number of times. At this point, the voting occurred and the Romney slate of delegates and alternate delegates all achieved the highest vote totals. However, the vote totals for the majority of elected delegates and alternate delegates were within the margin of doubt, where the elected delegate or alternate delegate may change if the provisional ballots were counted. As you recall from the previous video, Matt Sisk made it abundantly clear that provisional ballots would not be counted before the business of District 8 caucus was concluded. After the results were announced, many Liberty delegate supporters were understandably incensed that the provisional ballots were not counted. Many attendees demanded the provisional ballots be counted before the business of the caucus was closed. At this point, Matt Sisk again took to the microphone and provided the following statement.
It's closed.
strategy used by the Ron Paul people. What they do is they facetiously...
What is the rule?
Mr. Sis states that, quote, "This is a strategy used by the Ron Paul people." What Matt Sis forgot to mention was that the business in the District 8 caucus was conducted in a manner inconsistent with the balloting rules that were set forth in the Massachusetts Republican Party delegate selection plan. Rule 4.4 again was clearly ignored. Everyone should have been given a uniform ballot, no provisional ballot should have existed, and all votes should have been counted prior to the close of caucus business. Again, kind of going against the rules of the Republican charter that was drafted on how those caucuses should be run, mentioning provisional ballots, which had never been used. And then the third video will be from Stephen Zajkowski, who was the chairman of the Rules Committee that drafted the rules of the caucus back in 2012. He was not even allowed to attend the allocation committee. He was not notified of the allocation committee meeting in Marlborough back on May 30th of 2012. Moving ahead, by late afternoon of April 28, 2012, I was aware that the Ronald Reagan Liberty slate had achieved 36 delegates and alternate delegates. This number does not include potential Ronald Reagan Liberty slate delegates and alternate delegates who should have won slots, but did not because of the presence of this provisional ballot rule. Now, there are two remaining issues at hand. First, the Ronald Reagan Liberty slate wanted to ensure that the provisional ballots in all districts would be counted, and that no Massachusetts Republican was disenfranchised of their right to the delegate selection process. Second, all elected Ronald Reagan Liberty slate delegates were eagerly awaiting the certification to the RNC by the Massachusetts GOP. On May 29, 2012, members of the Liberty Clubhouse became aware of a secret meeting by the Allocation Committee in Marlborough, Massachusetts. It was believed that this meeting was being conducted to determine the outcome of the provisional ballots that were cast during the various caucuses. Many liberty-minded individuals became aware of this meeting and decided to protest outside the hotel where the meeting occurred.
Voting's the ultimate authority. Your shit doesn't matter. The solution to the problem.
This meeting is about the allocation committee is having a hearing to decide whether they're going to allow the District 5 slate of delegates stand, or if they're going to replace them with the Romney slate of delegates. The District 5 won by average 2-to-1 on the vote, and for whatever reason they want to challenge this district. There's a serious conflict of interest. Ed McGrath was one of the delegates that was defeated, and he's on the allocation committee, and one of the challengers, a woman, and I forget her name, I can't pronounce her name, but you know, they're trying to claim that the caucus wasn't run properly, and they ran the caucus themselves. So you know, it's crazy to think that they're going to claim default, but because of their own incompetence.
Are 9 provisional ballots that were sealed, that were not counted, and those ballots make a difference on who goes to the Florida convention, and they're being held for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I brought them evidence that I was as a matter of fact, I've been on the Republican Town Committee. I have been an elected member of the Republican Town Committee, and I have been a registered Republican, and I brought them documentation from my town clerk that I'm a registered Republican, and they're refusing to count my vote. It's certified. It has the town seal on it. It has the signature of the town clerk, and they're refusing to count my vote because my vote may make a difference on who goes to Tampa. And you know, we're sitting here and we're fighting wars because they have unfair elections. What about the unfair elections here? This is worse than the Soviet Union. We should be worrying about democracy in this country because this country, there's an effort to stamp it out.
Well, it's very simple, really. There's some of the outcome of the district caucuses on April 28th hangs in the balance based on provisional ballots that were cast and may or may not be counted for the actual outcome of the election. We're saying count all the votes. Open up the provisional ballots and count them. And you might ask what the provisional ballots were. Well, some people came to the caucus and the GOP establishment didn't have records of whether or not they were registered Republicans. And those that can prove that they are registered Republicans should get an opportunity to have their votes counted. Otherwise, it really comes down to something like a Soviet-style democracy, in my opinion.
We're here because the Massachusetts Republican Party is having an allocation committee hearing where they allocate delegates to the National Convention, and we're disturbed that the way they handled the caucus procedure, that they didn't do it fairly, and that a lot of our votes are being excluded, and a lot of our potential Republican members are being disenfranchised. A lot of the new Republicans got registered Republican the first 2 weeks of February in accordance with the rules. Unfortunately, a lot of those town clerks, especially in the cities, didn't update the Secretary of State. And so when those voters went to the caucus on April 28th, the state party said, you know what, we don't have you on our list, but we're going to give you a provisional ballot. The rules had originally said that they just need to swear an affidavit that they're a Republican. So they gave them a provisional ballot and swore that the vote would be counted in 10 days. Well, now that the results are in, and they're very concerned these provisional ballots will go towards liberty and not towards the establishment Republicans, they've decided to not count the provisional ballots under the guidance of General Counsel Vincent DeVito. The General Counsel has a lot to do. In fact, he's got interests and conflict of interest all over the place. To begin with, he was on the official Romney slate, so he definitely has a bias towards the Liberty people not getting in as delegates to promote the ideas of Ron Paul and to go down and promote audit the Fed and the uncongressionally funding of wars. So he has a big conflict there with the Romney group. On the other hand, he also has a conflict because he was in third place in his caucus, and that's the last slot to get in as a delegate. And there's actually 13 provisional ballots, so the odds are good. If those provisional ballots are open, he'll be bounced. So he ruled, as the General Counsel, that we won't count any provisional ballots. And unfortunately, he's never put that in writing. He's just said it verbally. And that's just not right. If you have a problem, you should put it in writing and then let us appeal to the allocation committee. Instead, he's just ignored our complaints.
Here because since we're children, since we're little children, we're taught in school that our voice counts, that our vote counts. We're taught that we're all equal, all right? America is supposed to be the most proudest nation of freedom, all right? Now, you don't have to like me, you don't even have to agree with me, but you have a voice just as I have a voice. You have a vote just as I have a vote. And the Constitution says nobody can deny that. And yet, on February 13th, here it is, right there, stamped before the deadline being February 15th, for the first time in my life, I've registered as a Republican. And I'm being told my voice, my vote, is silenced in the Republic of the United States.
The protesters had one simple goal: to make sure the allocation committee would count all the votes. In fact, the chairman of the allocation committee, Stephen Zikorsky, was not made aware of the secret meeting being conducted in Marlborough, Massachusetts on May 29th. And you can see his name right here is the chair who drafted the rule. Mr. Zikorsky, the chair of the allocation committee, clearly states, "I do not believe the hearing should even have been held." He goes on to state, quote, "The rules state that the procedural matters had to be brought up at the caucus itself. If those problems had not been resolved by the person who was making the protest and the caucus chairman, the parliamentarian at the state party was standing by all during the morning until the caucuses were over at the state committee headquarters to settle any disputes that came up." last video that I'll show you is from Steven Zajkowski. Again, he is the state committee member who was the chair of the rules committee that drafted the rules to state how the caucuses should be run.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, as obviously the chairman of the committee wrote the rules here, for your take on this meeting and well, I don't think the hearing should even have been held. For the simple reason it was about procedure, not the outcome, procedure. And the problem was that the rules state that procedural matters had to be brought up at the caucus itself. Right. And if those problems could not be resolved between whoever was making the protest and the caucus chairman, the parliamentarian of the state party would be standing by all during that morning until all the caucuses were over at the state committee headquarters to settle any disputes that came up. Now the chairman of the allocation committee here tonight was also a candidate for delegate. He was also a member of the rules committee. He's also an attorney. So he knew the rules and he knew the procedure, and he never complained about anything at that caucus. Nothing happened until the results came in and they weren't what they wanted. And that's my complaint. And I had no dog in this race. I was not a Ron Paul supporter. I did not even attend the caucus in my district, in the 6th Congressional District. And my purpose in being here, I was the chairman of the Rules Committee, as I think I may have mentioned to you, was just that I wanted to see fairness. And this would be a great injustice if they overturn the election. Have they made a decision yet? It sounds like they haven't made a decision.
Well, I don't think they're going to make a decision tonight. They're going to do it when there's no crowd around.
Oh, really? So at a separate meeting or something?
Or something. I don't really know. A lot of, I've served on the state committee for 26 years, and I've never been barred from a meeting of a state committee before tonight. This is a first. So there's some really bizarre things going on here.
You served for 26 years on the...
26 years on the Republican State Committee. So, whatever it's worth.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad to talk to you. Okay, have a good...
The allocation committee was clearly doing whatever it could within its power to ensure that the provisional ballots would not be counted. Fast forward to a meeting of the Mass GOP State Committee, which occurred sometime on or between May 30th, 2012 and June 5th, 2012. In which a large number of liberty-minded individuals attended and tried to make sure that the provisional ballots would be counted. After 2 rounds of voting by state committee members, Mass GOP state committee members decided that the provisional ballots would not be counted. Votes by registered Republicans would not be counted. Now let me speak with you regarding the national delegate and alternate delegate affidavit that all delegates and alternate delegates were received on or shortly after June 5th, 2012. All Ronald Reagan Liberty Slate delegates and alternate delegates, and if you don't mind put those up, the PDFs? Okay. All Ronald Reagan Liberty Slate delegates and alternate delegates received the affidavit you are now being shown on the projector screen on or shortly after June 5th, 2012. We were instructed that we must sign and return the affidavit to the Mass GOP headquarters on or before 12 p.m. on June 8, 2012, or risk being disqualified as elected delegates and alternate delegates to the RNC. There were a large number of elected delegates and alternate delegates who did not wish to sign the Mass GOP affidavit, as the language contained in the document was in direct conflict with the language in Section 4.5 of the Massachusetts Republican Party plan for the selection of delegates to Tampa, Florida, which is the document on the right-hand side here. The affidavit, we were told, must be signed, stated, I certify under the pain and penalty of perjury that on the first ballot of the 2012 Republican National Convention, I will affirmatively vote for Mitt Romney, the winner of the 2012 Massachusetts presidential primary. However, the language in Section 4.5 of the aforementioned party plan that we bound ourselves to at the district caucuses states each nominee for election as a pledged congressional delegate or alternate delegate shall express a commitment to a qualifying presidential candidate and agree to be bound to vote for that candidate on the first such roll call, unless released by such candidate as required by law. As it was still possible at the time we received the Massachusetts GOP affidavit that Mitt Romney may still release his delegates, I and many other Liberty delegates felt we could not break the pledge we made at the caucus and therefore submitted our own modified version of the affidavit. Many elected delegates and alternate delegates also signed and returned the original affidavit that we received from the Mass GOP. After returning our affidavits by noon on June 8, 2012, we waited for a response from the Mass GOP. Approximately a week later, we were notified that 17 delegates and alternate delegates were disqualified and would not be receiving certification to attend the Republican National Convention, myself included. Shortly after these 17 delegates and alternate delegates were disqualified, Brad Wyatt, who was one of our leaders of the Liberty Clubhouse, filed a state and federal lawsuit in an attempt to get an injunction against the ruling issued by the Mass GOP. We were represented by attorneys Robert Dell and Lee Goodman. The lawsuit continued through the summer of 2012 and on or until shortly after August 21st, 2012, when we were notified by Brad Wyatt that he was considering dropping the lawsuit. It is my understanding that Brad Wyatt contacted each delegate and alternate delegate to explain he had received information from the Mass GOP that they were interested in a compromise. And they would allow 3 delegates and 3 alternate delegates to replace the 17 disqualified delegates and alternate delegates. And just finishing up one sentence here. And I stated I had reservations regarding this compromise, although the majority of disqualified individuals indicated they would like to proceed and they wished to get as many delegates as possible to Tampa. I have much more information I would like to share with you, but I believe I've gone over my time, and feel free to speak with me after the presentation if you have any additional questions. Thank you.